A catastrophic snowfall erupted in the summer. Everyone who came into contact with the snowflakes died suddenly, just as everyone thought this was just a natural disaster. A batch of alien monster insects invaded Earth. They spun silk to form cocoons and devoured humans. The once prosperous city was completely reduced to a dead city. The survivors struggled to find a way to survive. However, a bigger conspiracy was brewing. Let's take a look at the latest 2025 sci-fi blockbuster, Reunited. One summer night in Argentina, several girls sailed out to sea in a small boat to celebrate. A strange aurora suddenly appeared in front of them. The curly-haired girl immediately returned to the cabin to check, only to find that the navigation system had failed. She was about to tell her companions about this, but suddenly realized all the girls had fallen on the deck. A snowflake that shouldn't have fallen slowly drifted towards this hot land. At the same time, on a certain street-side road, a group of protesters blocked Juan and his friend's way. These people were protesting that the Power Supply Bureau hadn't restored power to their homes. The friend in red in the back seat couldn't help but complain. Living in Argentina is really not easy. When I left, everyone was protesting and marching. 20 years later, the same thing is still happening. As soon as the words were spoken, a team of fire trucks roared past. The news said that a substation in Vicente Lopez was on fire. The fire also spread to a nearby asbestos processing plant. Burning this kind of thing would release toxic gases, so it alarmed 15 fire brigades to go to put out the fire. Fortunately, these things didn't disturb Juan's good mood. He sat around with a few friends playing poker. The friend in red wasn't interested in the poker game, so he looked around the room of the homeowner, Tano. Unexpectedly, he found a military gas mask. This was a souvenir that Tano bought in Europe. He was afraid that his friend would break it, and told him to put it back in place quickly. The battle on the poker table was in full swing. While the few people were concentrating, the light bulb above their heads suddenly went out. The phones that were just fully charged suddenly all turned off. There was a rumbling sound outside the window. Tano's wife, Anna, ran over in a hurry and said that the security guard in the garage had fallen. Now he was lying on the street. Tano was worried that the security guard had a heart attack and wanted to go out to sea, but found that the door was locked. He didn't know where the key was. Just then, Juan realized that something was wrong. Outside the window, something like snowflakes was actually floating. But how could it snow in this hot summer? Everyone guessed that it should be asbestos, because the fire had spread to the entire town. The security guard may have fainted due to inhaling asbestos. At this moment, vehicles on the side of the road suddenly crashed forward. It seemed that the banging sounds just now were the sounds of cars colliding with each other. There wasn't a single person on the silent street. Everyone couldn't help but worry about their families, but none of the mobile phones or landlines could get through. Tano told his wife to check all the doors and windows, and not to let any particles float in. The temperature outside the window had dropped below zero. The stuff outside was actually snow. The white-haired Uncle Russo felt more and more uneasy. His wife should be walking the dog outside at this time. What if she got contaminated by the poisonous snow? Despite everyone's obstruction, he put on a blanket and prepared to go home to sea. Everyone couldn't stop Russo, so they could only squeeze to the window nervously to check. Russo took a few steps and then fell to the ground without moving. Obviously, the snowflakes were abnormal. A few hours passed, and the whole town was covered in silver. Everyone exposed on the street had already died. The atmosphere in the house was very depressed. Suddenly, there was a sound of banging on the door from the basement. Tano went down with a kerosene lamp to check, and heard a faint cry for help from behind the door. Tano remembered that this door led directly to the garage. He frantically searched for the key. The others couldn't help but murmur. Why would the person outside the door run into the garage? That person seemed to hear their questions, and quickly explained that she was a delivery person bringing whiskey, because her car broke down and she was repairing it in the garage, but she was accidentally trapped by the heavy snow. Tano couldn't find the key, so he immediately pried open the lock to rescue her. The female courier ran in wrapped in plastic sheeting, shivering with cold. The group came to the garage through a secret passage. Juan's car was parked not far away. They planned to risk going over to take a look. Anyway, the delivery person had no abnormalities while wearing plastic sheeting and not touching the snowflakes. Juan and his friends also wore plastic sheeting and pushed the car to the door of the security room. Because Juan's car keys were inside, he set up a ladder from the car, then climbed into the security room and took the keys inside. Juan returned to the car and tried to start it again, but the car didn't respond at all. The other vehicles in the garage couldn't start either. Everyone had to gather together to discuss countermeasures. Since there are widespread power outages and vehicle failures, that means there must have been a high intensity electromagnetic energy burst in a short period of time. In short, a huge voltage surge destroyed all circuits. Only a solar storm or an atomic bomb explosion could produce this kind of destructive power. Just as everyone was feeling heavy, a light suddenly appeared on the street. It looked like it was in the direction of the baker's house. Everyone excitedly raised their kerosene lamps and waved them. However, the baker misunderstood and opened the window. The next second, he came into contact with the snowflakes and died on the spot. At this time, it was about to dawn. Juan's daughter had a habit of jogging in the morning. He had to save her no matter what. Everyone knew they couldn't stop Juan. They could only use the limited tools at hand to help him piece together a simple protective suit. Juan was ready and set off with heavy steps. He kept moving forward, passing over Russo's body. Every few meters he would see many dead people. The snowy town was full of death. Juan had not gone out for long before he began to hallucinate due to the low temperature. He always felt like someone was following him from behind. The nervous Juan quickened his pace and walked into the nearby train station. The first thing that caught his eye was a train stopped halfway. The carriages were full of corpses. Fortunately, there were still survivors in the area closer to the inside. When they saw Juan, they all pounded on the windows, begging for help. The people in the carriage had been locked up for several hours. Now they were cold and hungry, and didn't know what was going on outside. Juan knew he couldn't save them on his own, so he could only open his backpack and throw a bottle of water over. Whether they lived or died next would depend on themselves. After leaving the train station, Juan arrived at his divorced ex-wife Irina's apartment building. He went inside and took off his gas mask. Finally able to breathe freely for a while, the residents of the building were praying with candles. Juan bypassed these people and went to his ex-wife's door. He found the door wide open and unlocked. The house was messy, and there was no sign of his wife and daughter. Just then, there was a sound of rummaging in the living room. Juan thought the house had been robbed, so he immediately went over and grabbed the person to question them. The man with the braided hair had to explain that Irina sent me to get the medicine. As soon as he finished speaking, Juan felt a chill on the back of his hand. It turned out that the snow falling on the young man's clothes had fallen on his skin. Juan stared nervously at the back of his hand. However, there were no abnormal symptoms in his body. Irina chased out the irrelevant people, explaining that her daughter Clara had gone to a classmate's house last night. Now the phone was out of power and turned off. The address sent by Clara cannot be viewed either. Irina only remembered that the classmate was called Luna. When Juan heard this, he planned to go to the school, where all the students' addresses must be stored. He took his things and prepared to leave, but found all the neighbors blocking the door.
Heard you can touch the snow. Are you immune?
Juan casually explained that after the poisonous snow fell, its power would slowly fade. After he finished speaking, he pulled his wife and prepared to leave. A bald man blocked the way and told Juan to hand over the gas mask. Because the fresh water in the building was running out, they had to go out to find drinking water. Juan pretended to agree and bent down to pretend to take the mask. In fact, he took out a pistol from his bag. Juan intimidated the thugs and left quickly. Unexpectedly, the bald man also ran home to get a weapon. The two sides immediately broke out in a gunfight. While dealing with the bald man, Juan hid in an apartment. He used a wardrobe to block the door and told his wife to quickly find waterproof materials. At this time, the bald man was already outside the door, shooting at the door. Juan glimpsed a pickup truck outside the window, and realized that he could step on it to escape. He helped his wife wrap her exposed skin, and put the gas mask on her head. Juan planned to let Irina go find their daughter, while he stayed to deal with the bald man. As soon as Irina left, the door was broken down. Juan grabbed a plastic bag with his left hand, and a stool with his right hand.
You're going to defend yourself with that?
Juan wrapped his head in a plastic bag and jumped out of the window to escape, but the plastic bag wasn't breathable and it was difficult to supply oxygen, so he soon fainted due to lack of oxygen. On the other side, after Juan left, everyone was still hiding in the house. Tano was very cautious. To prevent the tap water from being contaminated by poisonous snow, he only allowed everyone to drink bottled water. However, the family's purified water was limited. They could only wait for Juan to return, and then put on the mask to collect supplies from the nearby supermarket. While waiting, Tano reinforced the doors and windows one by one, and took out a shotgun for self-defense. The delivery person was very curious when she saw the weapon, and immediately picked it up and gestured with it. Tano confiscated it immediately. He didn't trust this outsider at all. The delivery person sensed the other party's hostility, planning to put on her helmet and ride her bike away from here. Unexpectedly, the light on her broken bicycle could still light up. Tano immediately disassembled it to check it. Finding that this old-fashioned light bulb was still usable, he cut the wires and connected the record player to the battery. Sure enough, he found melodious singing flowing out. It seemed that electromagnetic attacks were only effective against integrated circuits, and had no effect on old-fashioned appliances. Tano remembered that he still had a vintage classic car, so he drove to the fire station, took the protective clothing inside, and distributed it to everyone. They heard a burst of gunfire while driving the classic car. Following the sound, they found Irina and Juan lying on the ground. After rescuing the two onto the car, the group happily set off, without noticing a few balls of fire streaking across the sky. Everyone first drove back to Tano's place, trying to call for rescue using the radio. Unfortunately, there was no response after waiting for a long time. Juan wanted to borrow the classic car to find his daughter. But he was rejected by Tano. This car was everyone's only tool to save their lives. What if Juan had an accident and couldn't come back with the car? At this moment, Cameron saw someone on the street. Everyone immediately became vigilant, ran to the front of the garage, and aimed their guns at the person. Upon closer inspection, the person was actually the hardware store owner. The owner saw the truck moving on the road, so he risked coming over to ask for help, hoping that Tano could lend him the truck. The latter, of course, immediately refused, just as the two were arguing. The sound of an engine starting came from the garage. It turned out that their friend O'Neill, who had been silent all along, took advantage of the chaos and drove away. O'Neill drove forward, and soon saw a strange red light on the horizon. His attention was distracted, and he accidentally crashed into a roadside shop. Juan and Irina couldn't leave their daughter alone, planning to walk to the school to find out the situation. The blizzard outside was raging, making it difficult to move an inch. The two had to crawl into roadside abandoned cars to rest. For a few minutes every time they walked a distance, Irina accidentally noticed that Juan was wearing a hearing aid. The two had little contact after their divorce, and didn't know much about each other's recent situation. Juan didn't want to explain much either. At this time, a team of vehicles passed by the roadside. They seemed to be checking all the cars that could be started. Juan and Irina quickly lowered their bodies to avoid the search. After a long trek all night, they finally arrived at Clara's school. Juan had never attended a parent-teacher conference, and knew nothing about the school layout. Irina told him to go out and find a car. She stayed behind to find Luna's address. Juan saw several cars parked by the side of the road. There was also a security booth nearby. He saw the keys on the table through the window. Just as he was about to reach out and take them, chaotic images popped into his mind. He saw his daughter fainting, the burning clock tower, and other bizarre hallucinations. When Juan regained consciousness, he found himself sitting in a car, and the car could be started. At the same time, Irina was searching through the office documents, but strange noises came from outside the door. She grabbed the fire axe and went out to check. A stall in the bathroom was blocked by a mop. Irina peered through the gap, looking straight into a pair of terrifying eyes. Juan heard the sound and rushed over. It turned out that a student wearing glasses, Badu, had been locked in the bathroom for 2 days by bullies. Unexpectedly, he avoided the poisonous snow because of this, and those who bullied him were already dead. Irina took out photos of her daughter and Luna for Badu to identify. Although the latter didn't recognize Clara, he was very familiar with Luna, because her brother was one of the bullies. Badu promised to take them to find Luna, but afterwards they had to take him home. Juan immediately agreed to Badu's request and, guided by him, arrived at a residence. The couple walked through the empty living room. They saw several corpses sitting by the pool table. Juan lifted a girl's head to examine it. He found that all the dead were of Chinese descent. It turned out that Badu had tricked them into his house, although Juan and his wife were very angry at him for lying, considering he was just a helpless child. They couldn't bear to abandon him, so they took Badu with them. Irina soon discovered that the young man had a fever, so she persuaded Juan to stop near a pharmacy, preparing to find some antipyretic medicine for Badu to take. Suddenly, a pregnant woman wearing a helmet knocked on the door, saying that her water broke and she needed help. Irina quickly let the pregnant woman in. The next second, the woman suddenly stood up, revealing a triumphant smile. Her companion outflanked them from behind, and took the car keys from Juan and his wife, and locked the two in the bathroom. It turned out that these were two more liars. Fortunately, they didn't find Badu. After the two liars left, Badu opened the door and let Irina and Juan out. Now that the car had been stolen, the three could only walk. When passing by the train station, Juan noticed that the bodies on the ground were gone. There was also a large hole in the protective fence next to it. He crossed the fence and walked into the abandoned carriage. He found that the bodies and survivors inside had all disappeared. No one knew what had happened here. On the other side, although their classic car was driven away by O'Neill, the delivery person found another car that could start nearby. Her original intention was to find her brother and gather together. Unfortunately, she returned without success, and had to return to Tano's house. Now that they had a means of transportation, Tano and Cameron prepared to go and gather supplies. Unexpectedly, they ran into the hardware store owner and others at the fire station. According to them, there was a gunfight in this area last night. The people in the slums had lost their minds and were looting supplies everywhere, so they planned to block the main road, set up roadblocks, and seal off the area. The hardware store owner asked Tano to consider whether to hand over the garage and join the newly established neighborhood committee. Tano didn't want to ally with these people.
If you know how long those guys will stay friendly? 2 weeks. After 2 weeks, they'll all be shooting each other.
While Tano was anxious, the radio actually received a signal from Cerro Cheto, Uruguay. The person on the other side claimed that the entire continent had been invaded by poisonous snow. It seemed that they wouldn't be able to wait for rescue. In the short term, Tano climbed onto the roof to adjust the antenna, wanting to try if he could still find signals from other regions, but the compass in his hand was swaying. That is to say, there was a problem with the Earth's magnetic field. Radio signals would also be affected. At this time, Juan and his wife returned to Tano's house. Not only did they not find their daughter, but they also brought back a stranger. Tano didn't care what Juan was going to do. Anyway, he and his wife would leave for Tigray tomorrow morning. Juan would never leave before finding his daughter, so he parted ways with Tano. The robbers, who pretended to be a pregnant woman, stopped outside a gas station to refuel. Unexpectedly, there was a strange noise from behind the oil tank. The man took a flashlight and went over to check, found a dark figure slowly straightening up. Immediately afterwards, the woman in the car heard a loud noise. An unidentified creature suddenly crashed into the car. Heart-wrenching screams echoed through the night sky. The car was knocked off the hillside and overturned completely. The next morning, Tano and the others buried Russo, packed their luggage and prepared to leave, while Juan decided to look for his daughter alone. With Anna's help, he found Luna's address in the phone book. Unexpectedly, this girl actually lived in the federal capital. Tano eventually drove to catch up with Juan, deciding to accompany his old friend to find Clara, and then go to the island together to take refuge. He really didn't want to lose a 38-year friendship because of this snowstorm. As a physics application expert, Tano had some speculation about the formation of poisonous snow. He asked Juan if he had heard of the Van Allen radiation belts. This ring of radioactive particles surrounding the Earth was blocked by the magnetic force of the Earth's poles, forming a shield that protected the Earth from things like solar winds. But if the poles disappeared, radioactive particles would fall on us. These snowflakes were fragments of the Van Allen radiation belts. The car was blocked not far after it drove out. A large number of abandoned cars were piled up under the overpass. Obviously, this couldn't be done by manpower alone. One went around to the side and found a car with its lights on. Just as he was about to climb over to take a look, a convoy drove nearby to patrol. The soldiers in the car told them to go home quickly, saying that the city was now off limits. The May camp was organizing rescuers. The two felt that the army must know a lot of inside information, so they secretly followed them in their car. Seeing the convoy stop not far away, Juan planned to go over and ask about the situation. Unexpectedly, several soldiers suddenly raised their guns and fired a burst of shots. The cars on the surrounding stone walls were knocked down, one by one. Tano vaguely saw several monsters scurrying around on it. That is to say, the soldiers weren't shooting at them, but at the monsters on the high wall. Just then, Tano's car was hit by a bullet, suddenly lost control and crashed into a repair station on the side. Those huge beetles were awakened by the bullets and kept crawling out and rushing towards the soldiers. They opened their uniquely shaped mouths, stretched out their tentacle with suction cups to wrap around the soldier's legs, pulled him to their mouths, and spun silk to wrap him into a cocoon. Juan and the other climbed out of the overturned car and ran to the roof of the repair shop to avoid the monster bugs. During this period, the hallucinations in Juan's mind intensified, as if he had glimpsed the doomsday scene of the future. When he regained consciousness, the fighting outside finally disappeared. The convoy just now evaporated in place. Not even half a corpse could be found on the ground. Juan picked up a weapon and continued on with Tano. They saw many cocoons left by monsters in the center of the city square, and not far away came a rustling sound. The two hid in a concealed place and quietly observed. They saw a large beetle monster dragging a corpse into an underground cave. The two were so scared that their backs were covered in cold sweat, and they just wanted to leave this place quickly. Unexpectedly, Tano accidentally bumped into an oil drum. The sound of the collision spread several meters underground, alerting the beetle monster inside. One immediately fired several shots at the big bug, but the bug's shell was extremely hard and wasn't affected at all. Fortunately, one fired a shot at the head which wasn't protected by the shell, and successfully killed the monster. Before the two could breathe a sigh of relief, the swarm of bugs, alerted by the gunfire, came out in full force, tearing the dead of their kind into pieces and devouring them. In a critical moment, a mysterious person waved to one and the other. They followed the other person's footprints to a building. The monsters were approaching step by step. Several Molotov cocktails fell from the sky and hit them. The mysterious person took advantage of the chaos and led Juan and Tano into the building. They climbed all the way up the stairs, shaking off the swarm of bugs gathered on the first floor. Finally arrived at the place where the survivors gathered. Juan asked them if they knew where the bugs came from. An old man heard this and pointed to the top of his head, saying, "Go up and take a look and you'll know." Juan and Tano heard this and climbed to the top of the tower, just in time to see several balls of fire crashing towards Earth. These monsters were actually extraterrestrial visitors. Then this poisonous snow disaster wasn't a simple climate problem, but a special means for aliens to invade the Earth. Because the bugs outside the clock tower were reluctant to leave, Juan and Tano had no choice but to stay overnight. They unfolded the map to confirm that Luna's house was about 15 blocks away. From here, the clock tower could only temporarily defend against the swarm of bugs. Hiding all the time wasn't a long-term solution. After everyone discussed it, they decided. The lame man among the survivors led the elderly, who had difficulty moving, to stay behind. The other people went out to look for a way to survive. There was an underpass at the Obligado Bend that crosses the Paz Highway. They could go over and try their luck to see if they could meet up with the army at the May camp. The group packed their luggage and set off. The monsters on the side of the road were dozing on the ground. As long as they didn't make a sound, they could pass safely. They soon arrived at the overpass blocked by abandoned cars, found the loose spots on it and kept chiseling. Just as dawn was about to break, everyone finally chiseled out an exit. They scrambled through the wall. Unexpectedly, the bug monsters were gradually waking up and going out to forage. A baby kept crying, which quickly attracted the bugs. In order to protect the mother and child, one was trapped in the bus and unable to move. In that critical moment, a deep bell sound came from the direction of the clock tower. It turned out that the lame man who stayed behind was ringing the bell to help them lure away the swarm of bugs. The old people who stayed behind poured gasoline on the ground, ready to perish together. The huge bug monsters piled up debris and quickly built a fulcrum to climb to the second floor. The old man flicked the lit cigarette towards the gasoline, ending everything. At the same time, one led the mother and child away from the bus. He remembered that there was a car with its headlights on in that pile of scrap cars, so he led everyone to find that car that could be started. Several people dragged it out of the pile of cars. Unexpectedly, a giant bug was hiding in the scrap car and suddenly pounced on Tano. Fortunately, Juan and his companions reacted in time and lit a firebomb to drive away the bugs. However, the swarm of bugs had already gathered in this direction. One fired his gun while covering everyone to get in the car. The billboard on the overpass was hit by a giant bug and collapsed. One sat in the truck bed and looked behind him, seeing the burning clock tower in the distance, just like he saw in his hallucination. Soon after, the pickup truck passed through the block where Tano lived. He was very worried about his wife, so he immediately jumped out of the car and ran home to check. One had to say goodbye to the survivors and chase after Tano back to his residence. He saw someone standing guard on the roof with a gun on the way. It seemed that monsters had also appeared here. One hurriedly returned to Tano's house, only to find Clara lying in his ex-wife's arms. He quickly asked Irina how she found their daughter.
She found us, Juan.
Tano said that everyone was here, so why not go to the island to take refuge immediately? But the problem was that there was limited space in the car, and it couldn't fit so many people. At this moment, the people from the committee came uninvited. Their original intention was to recruit Tano, but after hearing that these people were planning to leave, the committee was willing to provide a motorhome, but Tano had to hand over the garage keys as their temporary stronghold. Now that Tano had decided to leave the town, keeping the garage keys was not of much use, so he agreed to the committee's request. The main characters immediately packed their luggage and set off in 2 cars. The surrounding neighbors came out to say goodbye to them. Tano held the map and planned the route, but when they arrived at the port, they were instantly stunned by the scene before them. The seawater had completely dried up. The anglers by the bridge were long dead. Only the fish in the buckets were jumping around. One thought that maybe if they went north, the water flow would be wider and navigable. The delivery person thought it would be better to gather at the May camp. In the end, everyone decided to take the Pan American Highway first, and then make a long-term plan when the time comes. Cameron in the car looked ahead thoughtfully and said, "A large-scale retreat of seawater means a tsunami is coming." Everyone quickly got in the car and left the port. The road was full of broken-down vehicles. One of them was still billowing black smoke. The car owner's mask had a clear bullet hole. Obviously, he died at the hands of his compatriots. Soon after, Clara regained consciousness. She looked very healthy and normal. However, she forgot how she got here. Irina didn't want to push her daughter too hard, planning to wait for her to slowly recover her memory. At this moment, the car stopped near a large supermarket. You could see cars coming and going at the entrance. The supermarket was crowded with people. It seemed to be the largest survivor base in the area. The people who had escaped from the clock tower earlier were also hiding here. The supermarket had a wealth of stored supplies. They wouldn't have to worry about food and drink in a short time. But Cameron could see that Juan was absent-minded, and his behavior towards Clara was also a bit strange.
When I saw her, I had a terrible feeling. I felt like it wasn't real. It felt like a simulation.
One hoped that he was just overthinking things. During dinner, he tentatively told the people from the clock tower, "We saw a car that had been shot on the highway. I don't know who did it. It's best not to let your guard down against strangers now." The clock tower survivor motioned Juan to look behind him. "The people at that table are from the Suarez prison. They are all vicious and evil prisoners. They must be related to that shot car." Juan stared at the people at that table. He always felt like he had seen them somewhere before. Just then, a boy came over to chat with Clara. Unexpectedly, the other party's eyes were dull. and he suddenly started hitting his head hard. Irina quickly helped her daughter find a place to rest, and Tano took the opportunity to tell Juan that there was something wrong with Clara. After arriving at the port just now, I found the nautical log on my boat, and discovered Clara had sailed that small boat, because there was her signature in the log. And when Clara found Tano's house, she was wearing the cold weather gear from the small boat. Her inexplicable amnesia is indeed a bit strange. In the evening, Cameron couldn't sleep, so he chatted with some young people. Then he planned to go to the warehouse to find a few bottles of good wine. He quickly found a bottle of Blue Label whiskey, and couldn't help but take a sip. Unexpectedly, there was a strange noise at the entrance of the warehouse. The next morning, the sleeping Juan was awakened by the bustling crowd. He followed everyone to the door, and saw that the snowstorm that had lasted for several days had finally stopped. The sun illuminated the snow-white earth, bringing hope to countless people. Bada was the first to walk outside and breathe the air. Everyone also scrambled to go out. Tano hesitated and took out his compass, finding that the north and south poles were completely reversed. Before he could figure out what was going on, Anna suddenly realized that Cameron was missing. Everyone looked around, only to see the empty whiskey bottle on the ground. Immediately afterwards, there was a burst of gunfire. Outside, several masked men drove up to the entrance of the supermarket and fired a volley of shots at the survivors. Everyone scrambled around like headless flies. One found Irina behind the counter and learned that Clara and Anna were still outside. He and Tano immediately went out with their guns to find them. After a fierce gun battle, one shot and killed two masked men in succession, and Anna was hit in the thigh by shrapnel. During the gun battle, Tano anxiously stayed by his wife's side. One approached the masked man's corpse and pulled off the mask, revealing the face of a middle-aged woman. The other person also had a pendant with 3 children on her neck. Why would such an ordinary woman participate in this brutal gun battle? Before one could find his daughter, Cameron returned in an army truck. He lost consciousness after drinking that sip of strong liquor last night. When he woke up, he found himself lying near the Bune highway. He was picked up by soldiers from the May camp. Cameron remembered that everyone wanted to gather with the people at the camp, so he guided the army back to the supermarket. The survivors packed their luggage and left in the army's pickup truck. The more one thought about it, the more he felt that something was wrong. Why would Cameron be lying on a highway so far away, and inexplicably lost a piece of his memory? These symptoms were very similar to Clara's. Unfortunately, before he could figure out what was going on, the pickup truck arrived at the May camp. On the other side, the surviving masked man left the supermarket and walked into a dark tunnel. The monster bugs lurking in the dark actually made way for him in an orderly manner after seeing him. What exactly was going on? The development of the situation was becoming more and more confusing. In the blink of an eye, one had been living in the May camp for some time. The young and middle-aged survivors were receiving various special training to prevent future wars with the bug race. Young women were also assigned to the medical department to learn various medical and nursing knowledge. In short, everyone wanted to contribute to the camp. One day, a senior officer heard that Tano was very proficient in electronic machinery, so he asked him to repair an old radio. Tano originally wanted to find an excuse to refuse, but Cameron took the job upon themselves. Juan ran into the two arguing fiercely, and stepped forward to ask about the specific situation. Cameron said that the officers wanted to broadcast a message to all survivors, but they needed an engineer to help, so I recommended Tano. But the problem is that this operation must go to the city center to be successfully broadcast.
And how do they plan on getting past the wall? I don't get it.
I guess they're gonna hit it with a train.
What?
In Tano's view, venturing into the city center was tantamount to suicide, but Cameron felt that if the mission was successful, they could save more compatriots. Just as the two were arguing, several military vehicles drove into the camp. They had just brought back a new group of survivors. One immediately recognized Roberto, the leader of the neighborhood committee. The other party looked haggard, like a frightened bird. Tano originally wanted to ask how the others were doing. Unexpectedly, Roberto left a sentence, "They are all dead," and then quickly left with his wife. Late at night, the criminals who had escaped from the prison secretly called Juan outside to talk, explaining that they had nothing to do with the people who were attacked on the roadside, and begged Juan to persuade Tano to agree to the mission issued by the officers. The leading criminal said that the locomotive that could break through the roadblocks was in the garage of the Suarez prison, and the train station was just around the corner. "I've been driving trains with my grandfather since I was a child. There will definitely be no problems. As long as Tano agrees to help, this thing will definitely be successful." In the end, Juan persuaded his friend to go to the city center with a group of volunteers to convey the rescue message. As soon as they arrived near the train tracks, they saw several transport planes streaking across the sky. Although they didn't know who the planes belonged to, at least it showed that they weren't fighting alone. Others were also trying to save themselves. After a period of long journey, everyone finally arrived at the train station. and spontaneously divided into two groups. To devote themselves to work, Tano led some people to weld heavy steel plates and add heavy machine guns to the locomotive. After the modification was completed, all the volunteers took the train and set off. On the water tank not far away, a young woman watched them leave. The train hadn't gone far when it saw a large number of scrap cars piled up ahead. Countless monster bugs were crawling around inside. Everyone prepared and planned to accelerate and rush through. Juan and his companions grabbed the safety ropes, all lowered their heads, and prayed silently. The reinforced train crashed into the blocked pile of scrap cars at full speed and opened up a passage. The people on the train couldn't help but cheer. They didn't expect this method to actually work. The train slid along the rails for a few meters and then stopped. The impact had still damaged the train body to some extent. Fortunately, there were only about 200 meters left. Everyone carried the radio and walked forward. When they arrived at the target building, one faintly felt that something was wrong. It was too quiet here, and there were no traces of being attacked by bugs. If there were no monster bugs, why did the people in the city leave? While everyone was installing the wireless equipment, a squad was scouting nearby. They found the wreckage of a Peruvian fighter plane. There were still several high-explosive bombs in the cabin. Judging from the marked points on the map, the attack target of this fighter plane should be the nearby riverbed stadium. Just then, a little boy appeared in front of the cabin. The soldier greeted him loudly, but the boy remained unmoved with a poker face. The scouting squad leader seemed to sense something and turned his head to look at a building on the side. A row of people standing on it holding weapons had already surrounded them. On the other side, Tano debugged the equipment and connected the radio to the city broadcast. They broadcast the message according to the officer's request, calling on all survivors to go to the May camp. As long as we unite, we will become strong. This message is played every 5 minutes. If you are listening, please pass the message on. The people staying at the camp clearly heard Tano's message through the radio. Everyone knew the mission was successful and breathed a sigh of relief. Countless survivors raised their arms and shouted to celebrate the victory. However, Cameron suddenly noticed that the riverbed stadium not far away was emitting a faint light. One asked the officer if he wanted to send someone over to check it out. Unexpectedly, the latter immediately refused, because the team that was sent to find the plane hadn't returned yet. He didn't want to risk his men anymore. After Juan told his companions about this, Cameron said in confusion, "Is the officer mistaken? I just ran into someone downstairs. He told me that the reconnaissance squad is back and is now at the locomotive." The bearded man prepared to go over and take a look. Cameron said, "This broken building is like a maze. You better not run around." Juan and others found a room at random to pass the time, went in and played poker together, enjoying a long-lost peaceful time. But Cameron behaved very strangely. After losing several rounds in a row, he slammed the table and stabbed his companion in the abdomen with a knife. Tano quickly got up to check the bearded man's injuries, and Juan chased after Cameron, who was fleeing in panic. The latter stood on the edge of the rooftop, staring at the illuminated stadium in the distance. Cameron felt Juan behind him, turned his head and told him, "It's going to rain soon." After Cameron finished speaking, he jumped. Juan and Tano leaned out to check, found that a large group of people was gathering towards the building. Juan pulled Tano to find a place to hide. They soon saw the patrolling fat man, just preparing to go over and say hello. Unexpectedly, the fat man suddenly pointed at them and shouted, causing all those unidentified people to chase after them. Juan and his companions fled in a panic to the vicinity of the train tracks. Those thugs were about to catch up. Fortunately, the prisoner who knew how to drive the train appeared in time. He started the train and took everyone to escape. Most of the people in the full convoy that came were now irrational. Only Juan and a few others remained conscious. Tano wanted to return to the camp to report this matter, but Juan and the prisoner planned to go to the riverbed stadium to find out where those faint lights came from. Before leaving, the prisoner told Tano the basic operating methods of the train. After explaining everything, he followed Juan and immediately went to the stadium. However, as soon as they arrived near the stadium, they heard a burst of gunfire. The two carefully went over to check, found that there were people everywhere not far away, and these humans were practicing shooting. The strange thing was that they were surrounded by giant bugs, but the two sides didn't disturb each other and lived in harmony. It looked very strange. Juan and the prisoner avoided the crowd, walked into a building near the venue. As soon as Juan came in, he realized that he had seen this place in his visions. It turned out that those ambiguous pictures were all revelations about the future. Juan stood on a high place and looked down, finding that humans and bugs formed a mixed formation. There were many of their former companions inside. Even his daughter Clara was among them. A pair of uniquely shaped hands stretched out from the pavilion, emitting a faint light. It made a few gestures, the people in the formation received instructions to stand still. It was obvious that this part of humanity had been controlled by aliens. The main film ends abruptly here. However, we can make some explanations based on the original content. In fact, the May camp was a conspiracy from beginning to end. Aliens had long controlled senior officers to deliberately gather humans. This move was to mentally control them, so that these survivors become puppets. The reason why Juan can see illusions is because he belongs to the EI Eternaut clan, able to travel in the turbulence of time and space, freely traveling through the future and the past. In the original book, Juan failed for the first time against the alien civilization. Everyone in the world except him became a puppet, so Juan traveled back to before the alien invasion, to try to prevent the disaster from happening. However, traveling through time and space damaged his memory. All the failures he had experienced turned into fragmented pictures. Juan didn't understand the meaning of these visions, leading to the failure of this rescue plan. The above is the content of the first season. If you like my channel, please like and subscribe to it.